Hey everyone, welcome to Tales in Text, and I'm your host Nisha, and welcome to another book review. And yes, after a very long time, I'm finally reviewing a physical book as opposed to an audio book. Yep, it's true. I do really enjoy listening to audiobooks, but this time I just went on an impromptu buying spree in a local bookstore, and I saw this during my checkout, and I just grabbed it because I was really interested by this book. So yeah, without any further ado, let's review The Picture Bride. The Picture Bride is a Korean book written by Lee Geum-yi and translated by An Seon-jae. Again, I'm very sorry if I've mispronounced any of these words. Do let me know the actual pronunciation down below using a pronunciation guide so that I can get it right the next time. The Picture Bride is actually based on a cultural experience that used to take place in Korean marriages a few decades ago, and it's a cultural phenomenon, rather a marital phenomenon called picture marriages. Now, essentially, a picture marriage was when a bride's or other potential future bride's photo was sent to man living abroad, and that man's photo, the potential groom's photo, was sent to the woman living in Korea. Both of them would look at each other's pictures, and they would decide whether or not to get married to each other based on just looking at the picture. There were older women who functioned as sort of intermediaries between the two parties, between the groom's party and the bride's party, just sharing information, whatever information that they could get about the other person. It's, for example, what kind of what region of Korea did they come from, what did their family do for a living, how many people in their family are still alive, where are they living right now, what plans do they have for the future, and so on. So whatever limited information that they could get, they would share it with each other. And sometimes it would happen when they didn't have any information about the other person, or about one of the parties, or about both of the parties, and the specifically the bride would have to decide by just looking at the photo of the groom whether she wanted to get married to him and move overseas. That photo would be the only way for people to judge whether a person was, or that man was, capable of taking care of this woman and any future children that they had. And there was no way for the woman or her family to find out whether any of this information was true, because once again, this book is based in the early 1900s, the first half of the 1900s. And to figure out whether this person is really being genuine, if this photo actually belongs to this person, if this photo is of this man, and whether he actually has all these properties or not. So the woman would have to actually take a leap of faith. And again, because as with any conservative culture, the man always had the higher or upper hand in terms of having the pick of brides, whereas the woman, especially if she had to get married within a certain age, she didn't have a lot of choice and would have to just quickly give a decision and then move. Typically, these picture marriages would take place between women living in Korea and men who lived in the United States. Now, the reason that I picked up this book first off is, I just want to give some context, is because the concept of picture marriages is very similar to some of the processes that take place in arranged marriages in India. Now, arranged marriages, for some of you who may not know, is where the families of two individuals arrange the marriage of those two people, to be married together. And for a very long time, for even up till, let's say, just about 10 years ago, especially the woman hardly ever had a choice in this matter, hardly ever had a say in this matter. She would have to marry whoever her parents would say, you should get married to this guy. And while initially, a couple of decades ago, even men had faced that, wherein the father of the groom would say, this is the woman I've selected for you, you should get married to her, and would just show a photo and they would say yes. But in the past few decades, men have had way more agency, way more freedom, more leverage, and more picks of brides. So it doesn't matter if the man is significantly older, 10, 12 years older to the woman, but he would still have a greater number of picks to select from, whereas the woman would have a very small group of grooms, and oftentimes the choice was never left to her. Even today, we have arranged marriages, but the agency given to women has increased a little bit. That is, it's sort of become like a arranged/love marriage, where the couples are sort of selected and put together by the two families, but then the people involved, the people who are supposed to get married, they get the opportunity to meet each other maybe 2-3 times over the next month or two, and then come to a decision. But the concept of picture marriages did exist to some capacity in Indian arranged marriages as well, wherein the bride's photo would be sent to the groom's photo would come to the bride only if the groom agreed to meet with the bride or to marry the girl. And based on that photo and based on whatever little information that the families could get of each other, a decision was taken whether or not for these two people to get married. So since even India had this cultural context, shared marital culture, marital tradition, I was really interested in reading the Korean experience to see what women in Korea went through. Because the people mentioned in this book, their timeline would be similar to my great grandparents and their parents and their grandparents, right? So I really wanted to see if that kind of there was some sort of similarity between their experiences, or if Korean picture marriages were really different from Indian arranged marriages, and how women lived through these relationships with men, completely strangers to them, absolutely no information about them, never spent time with them, but trusting them with their entire future. This book, it partly delivered my expectations, while partly missing the mark. The Picture Bride is divided into 3 parts. The first part of focuses, or rather introduces, the main characters to us. Willow, the protagonist, her best friend Hongju, and another girl by the name of Songhwa. So we actually meet these characters and we look at their childhood and their growing up years and what leads them to become picture brides. The first part also looks at their how they make decisions to choose their grooms, or rather how their marriages get settled, and how they travel to Japan, because Japan was kind of the connecting point between Korea and the United States. And so how they go to Japan, the kind of checks that they have to go through, the health checks and all the other checks in order to emigrate to the United States. And part 1 of the book ends with these brides meeting their future husbands, or rather their current husbands, because essentially picture marriages were just a sort of a legal formality for men who had already declared that they had wives back in Korea and who they wanted to bring over to the United States. So they were already, for all intents and purposes, legally the wives of these men. So how they met their husbands for the first time, and it kind of ends with the first part ends their childhood, and sort of the new reality begins in a land that is completely foreign to them, in a culture that is completely foreign and racist towards them, with men who, you know, if once you read the book, you'll realize whether they did or did not meet the expectations of these women, and the kind of new lives that they would be expected to lead away from anyone they knew, loved or trusted. So that is where book 1 ends. In book 2, we actually look at how these women, these 3 women, Willow, Songhwa and Hongju, along with a couple of other picture brides, how they lead their lives, how the years go ahead, about, you know, children being born to them, and about how they kind of get on in life, whether they succeed, whether they're able to meet their expectations, achieve their dreams, or whether they fail, whether they experience tragedy. So you actually see a sort of growing up aspect, or in the form of the way their relationships with their husbands, respective husbands, kind of progresses, how their family grows up, how their family is nurtured, and their experiences in America, specifically in Hawaii, because that's where this book is based. And this book ends at a time when these women are middle-aged, they have older kids, and that's when part 3 kind of shifts narrative, because in part 3 we actually hear from the perspective of Willow's daughter Pearl, and this work sort of tries to tie into a neat little bow the relationship that Willow, Hongju and Songhwa have nurtured through these years. So up till this point, part 1 and part 2, they were actually really good. Part 1 was the best because it was very emotional. It had a lot of information about picture marriages, about Korea itself, and essentially the state of Korea in terms of its relationship with Japan, and the Japanese occupation of Korea, and the wars that Koreans fought in order to gain independence. And also, against this larger political turmoil, you have the turmoils faced by these individual girls, who are little more than girls, who are going to a strange land, to a stranger, to live out the rest of their lives. So you have these smaller battles sort of waging. So it was a very beautiful way to kind of contrast the larger narrative of Korea being sort of taken over and controlled by a very masochistic and patriarchal, Japanese community, being taken over by Japanese military, and Korea not sure how to thrive, how to gain freedom, and how to move ahead in the future, how to create a world for her descendants. And similarly, these women going out into the unknown with no guarantee whatsoever for their safety and their success in the future. So part one was really interesting that way. The part two, it actually not just described the lives of the three of these women, but also about their camp life, because as you know, a lot of immigrants, they sort of band together and create camps or communities or neighborhoods where people from the same country live together. Similarly, Willow does live in a Korean camp and on a plantation in Hawaii, where her husband works. And so you see camp life being discussed. We see the role of women in the camp, because the men would go out into the fields and work. But we also get to see what the women would do when the men were out working. How the women took care of their children, what kind of foods they made, how the relationship between Willow and her father-in-law kind of progressed. So it was a very interesting perspective in terms of the camp life. I do wish there was this particular part was fleshed out a lot more, because I would have loved to know more about how the members of the camp interacted with each other, because there is a lot of nod towards how politics affects personal relationships, because Korea had multiple people who wanted to be leaders of reformation. They had their own ideas. Some of them were non-violent, whereas some of them believed armed conflict was the way to get freedom for their country. And so even within the same camp in Hawaii, where all of these people kind of banded together as a unit, as a family, in this foreign land, there were fractures that were created because of these politics, adding pressure on personal relationships. So I wish this part was a lot more fleshed out, because I would have loved to read more about the internal dynamics of this community that needed each other to survive in this racist foreign land. But also they had their own problems with each other, because they had different hopes for their country, their home country, Korea. They had different hopes for their adopted country, the United States, and they had different hopes for their children who were US citizens. So I would have really enjoyed it had there been a lot more to part two. And one thing that kind of made me regret part three was because of how part two, I felt like kind of shortchanged me and focused on part three, because part three is just really felt disjointed, disconnected, and just unnecessary. I feel like after a point, the author just kind of did not know how to end this book, and that's why they sort of brought in the character of Pearl to tie all loose ends together. It felt unnecessary, it felt forced, it felt fake. It sort of reduced the authenticity of the book to me considerably by making it over dramatized. And it just didn't feel like it was in the same vein or the same tone as the rest of the book. The ending was abrupt. Some weird, shocking surprise twist ending took place, which I did not really care for. And so yeah, the part three really actually ruined the book for me. So if I am recommending this book, I would say go with high hopes for part one and part two, but don't really expect too much out of part three, because because of that, you might kind of be left with kind of meh, impression of The Picture Bride. This book is very fast to read. It's not a very big book. I mean, at least in terms of the kind of books that I read, this is actually a pretty small book. So if you're used to reading big books, this should not be a problem at all. Otherwise, this is a medium-sized book with around 309 pages. So, but the reading is extremely simple, extremely accessible language, good translation. And in fact, speaking of translation, the translator's notes in the end of the book, it's just about a page or so, was actually the most interesting part of this book for me. And do not miss reading the translator's notes at the end. So yeah, Picture Bride, I would say again 3 out of 5 for this book. Lots of 3 out of 5s in a row for me this month in terms of reading. Yeah, you can definitely pick this up. Now let's just look at the tarot cards that I've pulled for this book. The very first card that I've pulled is the Ace of Earth. And the reason I've pulled this card is because to me the Picture Bride represents the potential of creating a new life for yourself in a different place. Because we meet our brides, Willow, Hongchu, Songwa, and other picture brides in a land that is conflicted with political turmoil. There is a lot of military coups taking place, lots of violence. It's just not a safe space for young women. A country which has no clear or positive future in sight because of this sort of invasion and colonization by the Japanese. And so for these women who want to escape from poverty and whose parents are desperate to give their daughters a different life than the one that they lived, the opportunity to go to a new land which is free, which is actually renowned for its freedom and the autonomy it gives its people, the voice it gives, the opportunities it gives. As they say, America is the land of dreams, right? So that opportunity is hard to miss, no matter what the risks are in sending their daughter to a man they know absolutely nothing about. So the Ace of Earth represents this potential to create something new. It could go really well, it could also go wrong, but it is still something fertile and a space where you can create something. The opportunity is there, the potential is there. And I think that in that way the Picture Bride is also hopeful while it's also risky at the same time, because the opportunity for something new, the possibility of something better still exists, although there is no guarantee of it. So for me, that's what the Ace of Earth represents. And the second is the World, because ultimately we look at how these women come from a small village in Korea, and they go to this multicultural America where their worldview expands, where they meet people they would otherwise never have met, where they experience things which otherwise they would have never got to experience, whether it's good or bad. It's something that's completely new. Their whole worldview expands. They experience a lot of tragedies, but they also get a lot of opportunities, and their life really takes off in different ways. And so it also talks of the connection that is never lost between immigrants and their home countries, at least the first generation. And in a way, it also talks of how the value systems of the home country are still embedded within the second, third, and future generations of these immigrants' children, and how it ultimately impacts their relationship with their community and their relationship with their adopted country, adopted homeland. So to me, it sort of brings the whole world together and also opens up a world of opportunities. So that's why I felt the World card would be a good way to encapsulate this book. So yeah, The Picture Bride by Lee Geum-yi. I think it's a good book, but it's not really the best, not one of my top picks. But I would recommend that you pick this up on Audible if you get it, or maybe Kindle, because the physical book, at least in India, is super expensive. I paid like 700 for this, and I did not feel it was worth this money. Although the cover is really beautiful, but I did not feel it was worth this money. So pick it up on Audible or on Kindle if you can, because it'll definitely save you quite a bit of money which you can spend on another book. So yeah, alright, if you stuck around with me so far, thank you so much for watching, and I will meet you next time on another video at Syntax. Have a wonderful day. Bye bye.